Fathers love all and welcome. Today we're going to read Mark chapter 5. So kick back and relax, and let's see what the Spirit can teach us today. And they came over unto the other side of the sea, into the country of the Gadarenes. And when he was come out of the ship, immediately there met him out of the tombs a man with an unclean spirit, who had his dwelling among the tombs, and no man could bind him, no, not with chains, because that he had been often bound with fetters and chains, and the chains had been plucked asunder by him, and the fetters broken into pieces. Neither could any man tame him. And always, night and day, he was in the mountains, and in the tombs, crying, and cutting himself with stones. But when he saw Jesus afar off, he ran and worshipped him, and cried with a loud voice, and said, What have I to do with thee, Jesus, thou Son of the Most High God? I adjure thee by God, that thou torment me not. For he said unto him, Come out of the man, unclean spirit. And he asked him, What is thy name? And he answered, saying, My name is Legion, for we are many. And he besought him much that he would not send them away out of the country. Now there was nigh unto the mountains a great herd of swine feeding. And all the devils besought him, saying, Send us into the swine, that we may enter into them. And forthwith Jesus gave them leave. And the unclean spirits went out and entered into the swine. And the herd ran violently down a steep place into the sea. They were about 2,000, and were choked in the sea. And they that fed the swine fled, and told it in the city and in the country. And they went out to see what it was that was done. And they came to Jesus, and see him that was possessed with the devil, and had the legion, sitting and clothed, and in his right mind. And they were afraid. And they that saw it told them how it befell to him that was possessed with the devil, and also concerning the swine. And they began to pray him to depart out of their coast. And when he was come into the ship, he that had been possessed with the devil prayed him that he might be with him. Howbeit Jesus suffered him not, but saith unto him, Go home to thy friends, and tell them how great things the Lord hath done for thee, and hath had compassion on thee. And he departed, and began to publish in Decapolis how great things Jesus had done for him, and all men did marvel. And when Jesus was passed over again by ship unto the other side, much people gathered unto him, and he was nigh unto the sea. And behold, there cometh one of the rulers of the synagogue, Jairus by name. And when he saw him, he fell at his feet, and besought him greatly, saying, My little daughter lieth at the point of death. I pray thee, come and lay thy hands on her, that she may be healed, and she shall live. And Jesus went with him, and much people followed him and thronged him. And a certain woman, which had an issue of blood 12 years, and had suffered many things of many physicians, and had spent all that she had, and was nothing bettered, but rather grew worse, when she had heard of Jesus, came in the press behind, and touched his garment. For she said, If I may touch but his clothes, I shall be whole. And straightway the fountain of her blood was dried up, and she felt it in her body that she was healed of that plague. And Jesus, immediately knowing in himself that virtue had gone out of him, turned him about in the press, and said, Who touched my clothes? And his disciples said unto him, Thou seest the multitude thronging thee, and sayest thou, Who touched me? And he looked round about to see her that had done this thing. But the woman, fearing and trembling, knowing what was done in her, came and fell down before him, and told him all the truth. And he said unto her, Daughter, thy faith hath made thee whole. Go in peace, and be whole of thy plague. While he yet spake, there came from the ruler of the synagogue's house certain which said, Thy daughter is dead. Why troublest thou the master any further? As soon as Jesus heard that word that was spoken, he said unto the ruler of the synagogue, Be not afraid, only believe. And he suffered no man to follow him, save Peter and James and John, the brother of James. And he cometh to the house of the ruler of the synagogue, and seeth the tumult, and them that wept and wailed greatly. And when he was come in, he saith unto them, Why make ye this ado and weep? The damsel is not dead, but sleepeth. And they laughed him to scorn. But when he had put them all out, he taketh the father and the mother of the damsel, and them that were with him, and entereth in where the damsel was lying. And he took the damsel by the hand, and said unto her, Talitha cumi, which is being interpreted, Damsel, I say unto thee, arise. And straightway the damsel arose, and walked, for she was of the age of 12 years. And they were astonished with a great astonishment. And he charged them straitly that no man should know it, and commanded that something should be given her to eat. I hope that truly blesses each and every one of you who listen to it. Let's do a little bit of a review. Starts out in Mark chapter 5. Jesus has crossed the sea again. And as soon as he comes out of the boat, the ship, a man meets him there, out of the tombs, with an unclean spirit. And it says night and day all the time he was in the mountains and the tombs, crying and cutting himself with stones. You know, I think it's interesting to notice that first of all he was crying and cutting himself with stones. So that would lead me to infer, now that's just my opinion, that the man was wishing he didn't have the unclean spirits. He was crying. He was sad for what he had done with his life, it seems. And the cutting himself with stones I find interesting because unclean spirits, demons, and the whatnot love their blood. Everything they do is about blood. Excuse me, I had to cough there. I had to mute the mic. And if they can't get their blood from you sacrificing animals or other things, let's say, they will get their blood by you sacrificing yourself. You will cut yourself. You will give them your blood. They will have their blood. So remember, I don't know how prevalent it is in your part of the world, but cutting, as they call it, seems to happen to a lot of the younger adults, at least some that I've known. So remember, if you know someone that's doing that, that the chances are pretty good they've got an unclean spirit causing them to do it. I've said before about the things I used to do, and how I used to cut things into myself. Definitely demon related. But let's go on. It says when he saw Jesus far off, he ran and worshipped him. I find that very interesting. First he cries all the time, and now as soon as he sees Jesus real far off, he runs and worships him. I think this man, even with all his demons, and we'll see that there were quite a few here in a minute, still had a repentant heart. And the minute he seen that light shining from Jesus, he ran and worshipped him. And then, of course, the demons took over. and cried with a loud voice and said, "What have I to do with you, Jesus, Son of God?" And then they begged him that he wouldn't torment them, because he said to them, "Come out of the man, unclean spirit." And he asked the spirits, "What is your name?" And they answered, saying, "My name is Legion, for we are many." This man had many demons in him, evil spirits. We don't know what they all were. Could have been alcoholism. Could have been who knows what. There were sure a lot of them, though, because we're going to see here soon there was about 2,000 of them. But yet this man still cried over what had happened to him day and night. And the moment he saw that light shining in the darkness, he ran to it and worshipped it. And then all the devils besought him, saying, "Send us into the swine, that we may enter into them," because there was a big herd of swine feeding nearby. And as soon as Jesus gave them leave, in other words, as soon as he said, "Go," the unclean spirits went out, entered into the swine, and the herd ran violently down a steep place into the sea. And there it says there were about 2,000. So one point I want to bring up right there, brothers and sisters, is a very important lesson I see here. First of all, even with all the demons, about 2,000 that were tormenting this man, there was still a part of him that was somewhat repentant and sad for what he had done to bring them on himself. And the minute he seen that light, ran to it and worshipped it. And even though there was about 2,000 of those demons, quite powerful demons in a worldly standard, it said earlier about how they would bind him with chains and he would just break them, and very powerful demons that were in this man, 2,000 of them. Even they immediately realized the power of that person standing in front of them. And even though there was 2,000 of them, it only took one of him to put them away. So don't ever forget how powerful the one we serve is. Don't ever forget that that same power that was in him now is in us. So don't be worried about what these demons come and try to do and attack, and they're nothing. Even 2,000 at one time didn't even try to stand up to the power of Jesus Christ. And then immediately those that fed the swine, they took off, ran into the city and the country and told everybody. It's like, you won't believe what just happened. He was telling everybody what had done. So they all came to Jesus to see him that was possessed with the devil, sitting there, clothed, and in his right mind. And they were afraid, it says. Now think of this. They all knew this crazy man who hung out in the tombs cutting himself and crying all the time and doing who knows what all. I'm sure he did lots of things. They come and see him sitting there in his right mind finally, after who knows how long, clothed, and instead of being joyous, they were afraid. And when they saw it, the ones that saw it told them how it all happened and what Jesus had done. So what did they do? They began to ask him to leave their area. Brothers and sisters, Do you understand what's happening here? They see a man that they knew was possessed and not in his right mind, living in the tombs, crying and cutting himself day and night, sitting there healed of all his demons, in his right mind, and having a conversation with Jesus. And they get afraid and tell Jesus to leave. I find that just unbelievably amazing and sad at the same time. Because that hits home to me a little bit in this day and age. How we can come trying to teach people the truth of Jesus Christ and what He's done for us and the power we have through Him. And rather than listen to the truth that's sitting right there in front of them, they get afraid and ask you to leave. It's just mind-boggling to me how these people could see someone so hurt and abused, healed, and they get afraid and tell the one that healed him to leave. So, of course, Jesus gets back in the ship. And as he's getting in the ship, the man who he just healed, who was possessed with all the devils, begs him that he can go with him. But Jesus tells him no. He says, I want you to go home to your friends and tell them all the wonderful things that I've done for you and for the compassion that I've had on you. And the man departed and began to go through all of Decapolis and tell everyone about the great things Jesus had done for him. And it says all men did marvel. You know, right there, that line, had compassion on thee. I think that sort of helps solidify why I thought the man was repentant. Even though he was full of all these demons, he was still sad. And still, the moment he seen that hope, ran to it. And I think that's why Jesus had compassion on him. And then we go down, and now Jesus has crossed back over the sea, because those people didn't want him over there. And as soon as he got back on the other side, one of the rulers of the synagogues, Jairus by name, saw him and fell at his feet. Again, a form of worship. Fell at his feet and besought him greatly, asking him to come because his daughter was sick, almost dead. And he said, please come and lay hands on her so that she could be healed and live. So Jesus went with him, and as they were going, a giant crowd of people followed him and thronged him. And it says a certain woman who had had an issue of blood for 12 years, been to many doctors, spent every penny she had looking for a cure, never made better, only grew worse. Sounds a lot like people nowadays, running to the doctors, spending all they got, taking all those pills, looking for a cure. Usually not getting better, usually getting worse. Prescription drugs cause a lot more deaths nowadays than anything else. When she heard of Jesus, She came in the press behind and just reached out and touched his garment, because she thought to herself, if I could just touch him, just his garment, I know I can be healed. And as soon as she touched his garment, the fountain of her blood was dried up, and she felt in her body she was healed of that plague. She just knew that she was healed. And then Jesus, immediately knowing in himself that virtue had gone out of him, turned him about in the press and said, "Who touched my clothes?" See, Jesus felt the Spirit go out of him and heal this woman. And of course, his disciples, being the wonderful bunch of misfits that they were, said, "Do you see how many people are pressed around us? And you ask us, who touched you?" Oh, the good old disciples. But it says he looked around about and seen her that had done this thing, picked her right out of that crowd. And when his eyes fell on her, it says the woman, fearing and trembling, because she knew that it was her he was talking about. She knew she was healed. She came and fell down before him and told him everything. And after she had told him everything, he said to her, "Daughter, your faith made thee whole. Go in peace and be whole of thy plague." Now, I think it's something very important that we should touch on here. Because as we see in the case of the demon-possessed man, he still had enough faith that when he saw that light shining, to run to it and worship it. He had enough faith to get himself there, knowing that Jesus could cleanse him of those demons. And this woman had enough faith that if she could just reach through the crowd and just brush his clothing, that she would be healed. And Jesus makes it quite clear here when he tells her, "Daughter, your faith is what healed you. Go in peace and be whole of thy plague." We always ask others to pray for us, and it's a good thing. I'm not saying it isn't. We're told to pray one for another. But do you realize, again, it ties right back into running to the doctors and taking their pills and doing their treatments and everything else we've been taught, that with just a little faith, we can be healed. Does that mean we won't go through things? No. Sometimes, maybe that sickness is to help us grow. Not because the Father gave it to us. The Father doesn't give us sickness and death. The enemy does. But the Father uses everything the enemy does for his good, for those who are following him. But just remember, it isn't Jesus that was healing people. He was just the conduit, shall we say. He was just showing them that their faith is what was healing them. And while this is going on, after he's done with the woman, he notices that some of people came from the ruler's house and tells him, "Your daughter's dead. You might as well leave the master alone." They figure, well, that's all over. There's nothing he can do now. she's dead. But as soon as Jesus heard that, he said to the ruler, don't be afraid. Just believe. Again, keep that faith. Don't be afraid. Just believe. No matter what the enemy throws at us, don't be afraid. Just believe. Just have faith in who it is you say you worship and follow. Have faith in what Jesus said is true. And it says he suffered no man to follow him, except for Peter, James, and John. So in other words, he told everyone else, stay here. Peter, James, and John, you come with me. And of course, the ruler. So they get to the house of the ruler of the synagogue. And everyone's in there crying and weeping and wailing. And when Jesus comes in, he says to him, what's all the fuss about? Why are you crying, weeping? The damsel isn't dead. She's just asleep. Well, now, of course, the people, they laughed. They thought he was nuts. We know she's dead. So he puts them all out. Again, doesn't let anyone come with him. I think it was maybe all that lack of faith that they had. He didn't even want around it. The first group that said, what can you do? Leave him alone. You all just stay here. We got this. Then when he gets there, all these people laughing because he said she's just asleep and everything will be all right. Get him out. We don't need him here. So he takes the father and the mother and Peter, James, and John, and they go into where the damsel was lying. And he takes the damsel by the hand and says unto her, Talitha cumi. In other words, he says, get up. And immediately she got up and started walking around. And they were all astonished with a great astonishment. Now the only ones, of course, in the room was the father and the mother and Peter, James, and John and Jesus and the girl. So he immediately tells them, don't tell anybody about this. And just like Jesus would do, says, commanded them to give the girl something to eat. She might be hungry. So a lot of interesting things said there. First of all, he said that she wasn't dead, but sleepeth. Now, he could have just said that because he knew he was about to bring this girl back. And since he told them that we're in the room to make sure they don't tell anyone about what had just happened, he may have said that just to fool the people into thinking, well, I guess she was just asleep. We must have messed up. It's one possibility. I've also heard it said that people have used that verse to say, see, when we're dead, all we do is sleep. Because Jesus said, she isn't dead, but she's sleeping. That's another possibility. You'll have to take that one to the Spirit and see what it tells you about why he said that. But again, notice that every time someone didn't believe or didn't have faith, he would just put them out. Don't even want to be around you while I'm doing this. But the ones that had faith, the father and the mother, and Peter, James, and John, they were with him in the room. And I think it's their faith that made her whole. I ask for your continued prayers for the children. They suffer more than we will ever know, and they need our prayers. Pray for our brothers and sisters all around the world who's trying to learn all they can and walk in the footsteps of Jesus with the power of that Spirit. And of course, never forget to pray for those who come against us and for those who are still trapped and laughing and having no faith, so that they too can come to know the all-powerful, beautiful, merciful, and loving Father, Son, and Spirit that we serve before it's too late, because the time is running out. So I beg all of you to take that time to just go somewhere quiet and just get alone and ask the Father, Son, and Spirit to make themselves known to you. And pay attention, because the Father, Son, and Spirit don't do a box. They will make themselves known to you. Will you have the eyes to see it and the ears to hear it when they do? They may do it through another person. They may do it through an animal. They may do it through a song. They may do it through a thought. They may do it through a feeling. You see, the Father, Son, and Spirit does it however they want. But they always answer. They never leave us hanging. We just got to be willing to hear it and believe it, as it says, and have faith in what He's showing us. I'll see you next time.